I'm very glad to see you all there. I'm seeing Carlo. Carlo, hello. Thank you very much. I'm seeing Dallas Burtraw, Karen Palmer, Larry Goulder. Great to see you, Larry, as well. Ottmar Edenhofer. Thank you very much. Simone Borghesi, and Sjak Smulders. And probably some extra former keynotes will join us later. So probably you know that this is going to be the last session of the A Toxa workshop after 20 years. This is the 10th edition, and I think that we are closing it very, very well with an impressive set of invites, of invited papers, and also keynotes, and very nice roundtables. And of course, the place, you know, the place is amazing. So, but I think we close it because it served its purpose. And also, it's good to close things when they are in the top, right? Instead of closing things when they are going down. I'm here with Massimo Filippini and Andreas Löschel, who are co-organizers of this workshop in the last few years. They are good friends, very good support, and you know them very well, and you know that they are trusted people to work with, and very good academics, and also good people, right? So they are here. The three of us are going to handle this session. I'm going to ask Massimo to give a speech, an initial speech. No. I'm joking. But the idea is to provide the views from people like you who were keying in A Toxa. We could be today here because someone like Carlo Carraro was here in the year 2004 or 2006, I don't remember, and Ottmar was here in 2008. You know, we are here. Larry was here a bit later. So bringing these key people convinced many of our colleagues that we were serious, and also elevated a lot the debate. As you know, what we have here as audience is a mix of really top academics, both young and not so young. And also we have very good, very promising researchers, young researchers, some of them PhD students, some of them postdocs. So I think that this session is going to be very good for all of us, but particularly for them. What we want to have from this session is your reflections in 5 minutes or so on the challenges we have ahead. And you know, you can use 5 minutes, 4 minutes, 3 minutes, and you can say whatever you want, of course. This is very informal. And I think we'll organize this way. I will start with you because we also have here former keynotes and former very important people for A Toxa. JP Montero, who was the only one with me who came to all workshops in A Toxa. I think he deserves. Then we have Lucas Bretschger, who was the keynote in last edition. Denny Ellerman, who was also very important for A Toxa, was here in many occasions, and unfortunately disappeared from the academic environment years ago, but reappeared in A Toxa, and it's great. It's really great to have him here. Michael Hanemann, one of the key contributors, as you all know, in the economics of the environment, and also a good friend and collaborator for many years. And he came to A Toxa not as many times as JP, but almost. And so these 4 people are also with us, but I will keep them to the end, right? So first of all, we are seeing someone in a car, which is quite nice. We are seeing Dallas driving by car. Of course, you had told us that you were in that situation, and I'm very thankful for your participation in these conditions. So we'll give you the floor first, and I think that you asked also for a slide. So I don't know whether the technical people can show us the slide, and Dallas, the floor is yours. Let's see if it works. I'm a bit nervous because we've never done this before, and we have very good technicians, but still it's difficult.
Well, I'm a bit nervous too. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Perfect.
Okay. Well, I'll be quick before my luck runs out. Thank you very much for inviting me back. It's flattering and it's an honor. And my time at A Toxa, what the conference was just fantastic. I want to wish everyone a happy midsummer, a happy solstice, and here in the US, we're celebrating a new holiday, Juneteenth. If it's a national holiday, and many states recognize it, and it's relevant to my remarks, Juneteenth celebrates June 19th, which was the day in which the last information reached Galveston, Texas, after the US Civil War, that announced that slaves, formerly enslaved people, were free. And so it's really a remarkable statement of how our national consciousness has moved towards environmental justice and trying to rectify the past. And it's an extreme example of bans as a policy tool. We banned slavery, and it should be offensive, really, to compare a ban of slavery to the use of price instruments. But nonetheless, I'm going to use it to pivot to point that there is a continuum or a spectrum of price instruments. I'm going to bet that almost everybody in the room there now fully understands and appreciates the virtues of using prices to allocate resources in the economy and as a tool for addressing the environment. But as I look back over my 10 or 20 years what I spoke about when I was there visiting you over a decade ago, it was a recognition that there were multiple layers of government, local government, state government, federal government, all had this crucial role in unleashing the infrastructure that was going to be necessary for energy transformation, and how we didn't think that prices were going to be enough to do that. It wasn't going to resolve the problem with local land use, siting decisions, things like that. And now that we have in the US the Inflation Reduction Act and billions of dollars of investment, we see that, in fact, that's really true. So now if you could just show the slide, and then I can wrap up. This slide.
Last slide.
Is it showing? I can't. Oh yeah, go to the next slide, please. This slide is really just a cartoon. This slide is just a cartoon that appeared in a paper that we wrote in Nature Climate Change. So it's not empirically driven. It's driven from some of our professional experience, and the notion that even as though we adhere to the idea that prices ultimately are the most efficient tool, and we hope the most stable tool, there's a lot of obstacles in the way of getting there. And so it's illustrating a policy sequence that might be necessary in order to introduce a regime which is to regulate the an environmental problem for the long run. In a previous paper that Ottmar and was Michael Pala, we this specifically by talking about policy sequencing and stole the phrase from Marcus Aurelius, what stands in the way becomes the way. So although we bring this theory about prices to the problem, when you encounter the problem, if you have an army that's going to march to the Alps and there's a boulder or a mountain in the way, that becomes the way in the sense that it determines the strategy that you have to use in order to move your army. And when we try to advance carbon pricing and address climate change, we encounter a number of different obstacles at state and local government, or in civil society, or concerns about environmental justice, et cetera. And those have to inform our policy strategies. And as I've moved from economics to try more and more to be involved in policy implementation, that's a lesson that I've learned with y'all. And I really appreciate the chance to just that reflection. So I'll stop there, and thank you so much for letting me go first.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Dallas. Of course, you all know Dallas, or most of you all know Dallas. He is at RFF, and he was a keynote speaker years ago. So let me go now with the following speaker. Perhaps I can follow the order there. Carlo. Carlo, I can see you there. I don't know whether you can share some thoughts with us. Carlo is professor, president emeritus at the University Ca' Foscari, University of Venice, and he was president for many years of the European Association of Environmental and Resource Economics, and also he had a big role in the IPCC. So Carlo, the floor is yours, and he was, of course, one keynote here.
Thank you. Thank you, Xavier. I'm really glad to be here today. I know what you did in these 20 years. I know how successful was your attempt to gather researchers from all over the world, in particular young people, people who had a chance to present ideas, to share knowledge, to become friends. And these contacts were very productive for many years. It's a pity that you won't want to stop after 20 years, but I understand why you want to do it. I would like to spend a few words following your suggestions on recommendations for future research. I think that it's a crucial moment for environmental economics, for economics in general, but specifically for environmental economics. And it's a turning point, and we need to identify new research direction or improve old research directions. I spent my career working partly half of it on the theory of international environmental agreements in particular, and the other half on modeling, on the development of integrated assessment models. And models that we developed 20, 15 years ago have been used by the IPCC, by the way, among others, by the IPCC for the 5th and the 6th assessment report. But already in the 6th assessment report, we perceive that these models were not adequate. And now, for the next period, the next 6-7 years, we really need a new generation of models. So we've been doing a lot on the old, or what now the old models, and Ottmar is here, and the collaboration with Ottmar and his team was very successful and very productive. But now we need something more. And why we need something more? Probably because policy questions are different or are unanswered. There are some policy questions that are unanswered, in particular as far as distribution issues are concerned. Existing models are quite good in delivering answers about costs and benefits and the size of the net benefits and the size of the cake, but not on the distribution, the allocation of these net benefits. I'm talking about net benefits from mitigation or net zero transition or whatever, but certainly we can compute these net benefits quite well, but not how they go to different groups in society, different households or different sectors, or workers versus salaries versus profits, and so on and so forth, but also internationally, how they go to different countries, and in particular the North-South divide or the global South recrimination against North are not really well dealt with, well treated in the existing generation of models. And there is also another issue, which is the transition, the short-term component of the policy analysis. These models, by design, being optimization model, and they work over the long term, they are quite good in providing long-term answer, but this is not what policymakers want to know. They want to know what happens in the short term, what happens in the labor market when the labor market is not in equilibrium, and a transition, by definition, implies that in some sector there will be disequilibrium, there will be unemployment. And so we need models with unemployment. There are attempts, of course. There is something new. I have in mind, for example, the new JRC model in Sevilla, moving into this direction. there are attempts to improve models in many directions, but still we don't have the tools that we need. So well, if I can recommend something, is really to ask young researchers to work more on applied environmental economics, and in particular on the development of a new generation of models. And finally, there is another reason, which is disrupting modeling activities in all fields, in all sciences, which is machine learning for the last few years, and from now on, artificial intelligence. And even climatologists, even climate modelers are now facing a big change around activity, and economists will deal with the same difficulties, the same problems, but also the same opportunities, because artificial intelligence is providing a large opportunity to improve the quality of the models together with the improved data set that we have at our disposal. So that's what I would like to leave at the end of these 20 years, for someone else to start another 20 years of collaboration and cooperation to develop something useful for policymaking and something useful for business making and for societies.
Thanks so much, Carlo. If you can stay for a while, I will prefer to continue giving the floor to different people, because we are now connected and it works. And then I will give the floor, before going to the people here, to the audience to give questions to you, if possible. You can answer these questions. So let's go with Karen Palmer. Thank you, Karen, for being there. Karen was also keynote here, and also she's at RFF. And we are very happy to have her. The floor is yours.
Thanks, Xavier. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah.
Great. So, well, good afternoon, everybody. Congratulations on a successful run for a fantastic conference. I really wish I could be there in person, because it's about to be 95 degrees here in Washington, so much more pleasant there. So, I want to reflect a little bit. Like when I spoke at the Atlantic Workshop in ETH, was the summer of 2016, and I talked at that time about various gaps in U.S. climate policy. I'm happy to report today that some of those gaps were filled. Dallas mentioned the passage of the Inflation Reduction Act, which was passed in 2023 and signed into law then, and also there's some recent regulations that were finalized by the EPA. Both of those policies, I mean, the IRA has a broad scope, but the emission reductions that they promise come a lot from decarbonization of the electricity sector. And when you think about economy-wide decarbonization, the electricity sector is like the first step, and then the second step in a big way is electrification of other energy and uses like buildings, transport, and to the extent possible, industry, that these activities are part of a cost-effective pathway to decarbonization. So if we do that, we're going to raise our reliance on electricity, and that brings a greater focus on the efficiency, the reliability, and the resilience of that sector, which I tend to refer to as kind of the linchpin of economy-wide decarbonization, that is electricity. So looking forward to an economy that's transformed in this way, it's important to identify what combination of policies and in particular changes in electricity market are needed to support a larger, clean, resilient, and reliable electricity sector in the future. And I think this is where a lot of new research is needed, both on policies, but also on market institutions. And I'm just going to highlight a couple of those that are in need of more attention, but they're certainly, this is just a subset, I would say. So one is creating investment incentives. We have had across certainly the developed economies a number of policies to support investment in renewables. In the United States, those tend to take the form of renewable portfolio standards or clean energy standards, which might support investment even broader than renewables. We've had feed-in tariffs in Europe. Most recently with the IRA, there's tax credits. So renewables are gaining traction in various locations. And the success of those policies has contributed to generally lower wholesale electricity prices, but also highly variable electricity prices. And it's that variability that kind of poses a threat to some energy economists' dream of an energy-only market with shortage pricing and ideally an efficient carbon price supporting investment in new generation. And that's largely because this variability is really raising the cost of financing for new renewables. And so what new market designs and institutions do we need to support financing of new renewables? Now, there's lots of conceptual proposals out there, and actually we're coming out, myself and some co-authors are coming out with a review paper about those ideas, but there's very little formal modeling or empirical evidence on what's the best approach. So more research is definitely needed in this space. The second challenge is, supporting reliable supply of electricity. So, for a variety of reasons, primarily the physics of the grid, the electric system reliability is a public good. And so there's underinvestment in that in general, and a highly renewables dependent grid poses new challenges to reliable electricity service. They're not insurmountable, but they are out there. It's also really important during this energy transition to maintain electric system reliability so that outages don't undermine progress in this space. So looking to supply side solutions to that, which would encompass some combination of energy storage on the grid, keeping some emitting resources around, natural gas turbines, but not running them very often, and eventually getting investments in dispatchable emission-free resources that can be called upon to generate electricity when it's needed, which is often not possible with renewables. So what can we do to both keep these flexible resources online, not have them operate a lot, and also incentivize research and development and deployment activities around new sorts of dispatchable resources that can meet that demand. It's really important to find low-cost ways to support the reliability and resilience of the grid, because the price of electricity, as we know from past research, is relative to other fuels, is an important factor in making progress on electrification in the first place. So we need to pay careful attention to the costs here. And the third area where I think research is really important is around engaging new flexible loads through rate design and automation. So, traditionally, electricity system planners and grid operators have dispatched the grid, brought to supply to meet demand. So primarily reliability challenges have been having sufficient supply to meet demand. And there's generally been resistance, particularly among policymakers, to using prices to move demand in time to address peak period issues and also to address periods of abundant generation when maybe new demand could come online. But we have opportunity with newly electrified loads, especially those where the consumption of energy services is separated from the consumption of electricity. So things like transport, like your EV, you charge it at a different time for when you use it, or water heating, for example. But even building heating and cooling, there could be opportunities to use prices and automation to shift demand in time to periods when there's a lot of renewables online. This could help limit renewables curtailment and ensure system balance. But the key to making this happen is identifying ways to do this that consumers will accept and that system operators will trust, because they know that dispatchable generators will be there when they need them, or at least they have more confidence about that. Can they have confidence about flexible load? I think finding ways to bring flexible load and bring demand to supply in this new system of the future will substantially lower the costs of the clean energy transition. And highly variable costs of energy that are anticipated with the grid that I mentioned earlier could finally make the rewards of time shifting of flexible load worth the investments necessary to overcome resistance to this type of change. So I guess what I'm inviting folks to do is at the intersection of energy economics and environmental economics to kind of explore some of these institutions and opportunities for new ways for the electricity system to kind of come into equilibrium. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Karen. I see Larry Goulder. The floor is yours, Larry, and hello, great to see you. No, we don't hear you. Let's see if
Can you hear me now?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. Well, it's a pleasure to once again be involved with the A Toxa workshop, and congratulations on a very successful run. I continue to look back fondly on the time that I was directly involved in person, but I've also followed the goings on in the workshop over the years, and really enjoying today. So actually, I'm going to offer just a couple comments that overlap a bit with Carlo's comments. As you'll see, I guess the basic theme is political feasibility, and in order to achieve good environmental policies that are cost effective, but also break through the political filters, one needs to account for the stakeholders and the distribution. And as Carlo suggested, I think we need models that look more closely at the distributional impacts, while at the same time looking at the aggregate or cost effectiveness and efficiency impacts. So models are doing that. They've been doing that over the years, but I think it's really a promising research area to try to do more of that. So I'm just suggesting basically the basic point is that we need to find policy designs that, in a sense, thread the needle, because in policy, in the sphere of introducing environmental policy, we have at least two competing goals. One is economic efficiency or cost effectiveness, but another is political feasibility. So we need to combine attention to both and look at the trade-offs, and hopefully find a sweet spot that is identify policy designs that can achieve simultaneously both objectives. Both have a reasonable chance of being enacted, and second, being reasonably cost effective. And in the context of climate policy, I think that means that one looks at the distributional impact and incorporates in our policy design mechanisms either for compensation, so that those who would otherwise oppose the policy might be less inclined to do so, or consider other instruments. This makes me think of Dallas's presentation, at least in the short run, introduce certain kinds of subsidies as a way of getting things, moving things forward. As much as I love positive emissions prices, for the context of political feasibility, maybe in the short term, one needs to depart from the first best. And final comment is that, and this is partly an issue of looking at distribution and political feasibility, I think there's been promising work in recent years to try to integrate the short run and the long run. This also kind of overlaps with Carlo's point about the need for transitions. And I'd be specific, I think it's really valuable to do research that considers shorter run employment impacts, as well as the transition to the longer run, where a lot of these short run disruptions aren't quite as important. So I thought, really happy to be able to offer some comments, and I hope that you'll find these somewhat helpful.
Thank you, Larry. Thank you very much. As you know, Larry is professor of economics at the Stanford University, and now let's go to Ottmar Edenhofer. He's professor at the University in Berlin and director and chief economist at the Potsdam Institute of Climate Impact Research. He was chair of the IPCC while we were in assessment report 5. And also he currently chairs this very important European Scientific Advisory Board on Climate Change. Thank you, Ottmar, for being here. It's an honor for us to have you here. And of course, you were a keynote in A Toxa, so we are looking forward to your comments.
Yeah, thank you very much for the invitation and congratulations. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Good. Yeah, thanks. It's great to be here and to see so many good friends. What I would like to emphasize in my talk is the following. When I gave the keynote in Toxa a few years ago, we have been in a completely different situation. Meanwhile, my understanding is that we have two very important climate policy packages on planet Earth. The first one is the Inflation Reduction Act in the United States, and the second one is the European Green Deal. In the United States, and the European Green Deal has been carried out by democracies. No single autocracy on planet Earth can compete with these two major achievements in climate policy. Of course, both achievements, the Inflation Reduction Act and also the European Green Deal, are not uncontested. So we had the European election, and there was definitely a movement towards the right wing. But nevertheless, I'm quite confident that the European Green Deal, at least the corner pieces, will remain intact. And I hope so that in the United States we will see also an election which basically helps us to restore our faith in the merit of democracy. But still, what has been achieved so far over the last 20 years on climate and energy policy is really remarkable. And let me emphasize another point. So these achievements wouldn't be possible without our profession, without the economists. So think about the development of the emission trading schemes in Europe, one for electricity and industry, the other one now for transport and building. And now we are discussing, even under the current situation in Europe, a third one for agriculture. And it would be really worthwhile to analyze and to compare the Inflation Reduction Act and the European Green Deal on many respects. And I would like to highlight at least three aspects here. First, I think it is wise to think, when we talk about climate change, climate policy, in terms of risk management. I think this is quite important, and the late Martin Weitzman basically has educated us to think in a risk management framework, and I think that's very important. Secondly, it is equally important that we develop tools and models to evaluate policy instruments. First, we should carry out large-scale studies about the ex-post evaluation of policy instrument, what worked and what did not work, so that we can really learn about our past experience. And it's not only the case that we see a lot of implementation of climate laws in Europe and in the United States. After the Paris Agreement, we see many implementation of admittedly weak climate policies, but still there are climate policies around, and I think a reasonable ex-post evaluation is very wise. And when it comes to the policy instrument, I would like to highlight two important aspects. It has been mentioned very often, distributional concerns are extremely important. Policymakers would like to understand the distributional consequences of the policy instruments. But it's not only about the vertical inequality, it also is about the horizontal inequality. It is important to think about the poor and the rich, but it is also important to think about people in the urban areas and in the rural areas. I think that's incredibly important. And in Germany, we made a very interesting and important experience over the last 4 years where we have seen that ignoring horizontal equity and ignoring horizontal justice is basically a road to a complete failure. The last thing what I would like to emphasize, because this is quite important in the regulation of the European Union, but I hope this is also something which will unfold in the United States. These are carbon dioxide removal technologies. I believe that carbon dioxide removal technologies could be a game changer because of three reasons. The first one is carbon dioxide removal technologies have the potential to basically to overcompensate the overshoot, and we are basically in the middle of an overshoot, and therefore we need some kind of technologies which helps us to bound the temperature curve back. I think that's crucial. But CDR is not only important for managing the overshoot, it could also help us to smooth the intertemporal transition pathway. And third, I find it very interesting that CDR could increase the potential of international cooperation, because the leakage can be tamed much better than in conventional mitigation. I will not say conventional mitigation is out and CDR is in. This is not my argument. There are complements, but I think CDR is quite important. And what kind of policy instruments should be implemented to promote CDR is something which is, from my point of view, at the top of a research agenda. And this brings me back to my final comment about risk management. Of course, CDR is not a riskless option. Managing the overshoot comes with a lot of risks on the economic side, but also on the climate impact side. So to conclude, I think we have achieved over the last 20 years a lot, also thanks to the Toxa workshop, but I think the economics profession should improve the models, should improve the tools to remain relevant and even to become more relevant in the implementation of the policy tools along the lines which has been discussed by Carlo, Larry, and others. Thank you very much. And I missed the workshop, but I hope the profession will find other platforms, other arenas to discuss the challenges ahead of us and help the policymakers and the decision makers to do the right thing.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ottmar. Let's go now with Sjak Smulders.
Yes, thank you. It's nice to see you all again. I think we all have very good memories of the A Toxa workshop. I need to go 20 years back. I think I gave the first keynote. And it was a bit scary for me because I think Xavier asked me to give 4 hours of keynotes, which was really a lot. So I noticed that A Toxa is quite close to Santiago de Compostela, and I went to the church. I did the ritual. I prayed to survive, and I did survive. But the best thing that happened was, of course, that the workshop survived and how it flourished so much. So it's great to have seen this workshop for so many years. Of course, the key question is maybe, what was the questions we had 20 years ago, and did we find some answers? In the meantime, I think we found many answers, many different methods to answer these questions, but maybe the main question is still, what is the cost of environmental policy? What's the cost of climate action? Can we convince others that the cost is maybe smaller than people think so that we can take action, not be too pessimistic? This question is still valid, and maybe we should use the next 3 minutes to reflect on this question. So I think the methods changed a lot. I think we started with simple models, with simple numbers, and we replaced gradually simple models by complex models, by more refined simulations. We developed a whole set of climate models, integrated assessment models. All this happened in the past 20 years. We also developed the empirics. Empirics was hardly being done in environmental economics from 20, 30 years ago. We introduced distributional issues, second best policies, all of these things. But I think if we still want to answer this question, what is the cost of environmental policy? Somehow we lost a bit sight on the long run. And of course, that's maybe the topic that's connected with my own research most. It's about, in the long run, probably technology, endogenous technology, induced technical change. That's what I learned from Larry, actually. That's going to be the main mechanism to reduce the cost of environmental policy. And how much do we really know about this? That's, for me, the key question. So let's see if the empirics, for instance, helped to think about what is the cost, the long-run cost of environmental policy. And I think here, again, we lost a bit sight on the long run because, yes, we have better estimates of price elasticities, how much does energy demand fall if we raise prices, but this is typically short run. And the more empirics we do, the more refined the data that we use is, typically it's the more short run. We have information about day-to-day prices. Yes, that's good, it's impressive, but at the same time, it's only short run. We have no examples of long-lasting price spikes. It's at most a few months, right? A year, maybe 2 years. But what will happen if we have structurally higher energy prices? Because that's the relevant scenario for the cost of environmental policy in the context of climate change. What is the responses by behavioral responses, and what's the responses from technology? Yes, we know a lot more about nudges, about behavioral responses, but typically we find, I think that's my reading of the literature, initially we were very positive about nudges, about behavioral changes, but now we think, no, it's not enough. You only try to nudge people into energy savings. It's a short-lived response. You need to have the price response as well, the price stick, so to speak. Why can't we really identify the effect of long-run policies? Well, because we don't measure expectations, I think. We don't know if firms see an increase in the ETS price, if they see an increase in electricity prices, they don't know how long these spikes will last. Because they don't know what's future technology, they don't know what's future policies. All these uncertainties will impact their expectations, and as long as we don't know their expectations, we don't know their responses. And that's the main challenge, I think, for the empirics, but also maybe for the model part. So if we go back to the modeling and the analytical tools we have, maybe we should also build models in which expectations become much more important. And I think recent work has worked on this. For instance, there is now models built in Bologna and in Oxford, Amsterdam, with expectations about policies. So assume some Markov process in which policies can tip. All of a sudden, the right wings become dominant again, and you get the crash in the policies, or the opposite. These things can maybe be modeled using political science models. This is, I think, a new field that we should develop. And the other part would be the expectations, not so much about policies, but more about how productive induced technical change is. If we rely for the long run on induced technologies, we should know what is the expectations that investors have in these new technologies. Some of them will say it's never gonna fly, the others are overly optimistic. I think a lot of evidence shows that experts, even experts, are systematically wrong. They underestimate the potential for technical change. And typical success stories are driven by some overconfident investors. So, and we can model this, and I think that's important. Later on, then we should, of course, match it with stock market data, maybe with the empirics, and then we are full circle. Then we will be able to join the short run modeling, the sophisticated empirics we have brought in over the past 10 years, with the long run view in which expectations about policies and expectations about the possibilities for induced technical change come together to work towards the effective policies. Because I think everybody believes that climate change is real, but the problem is that there's too many expectations, too many different beliefs about whether the cost is reasonable. Is the cost high, is the cost low? The skepticism is now not about climate change, but is about the cost of it. And maybe that's the next field. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there is already many papers that develop this. There is a lot being researched, so that's good. So then my question would be, at some point we should start having a good overview book. So there is so many details now. Why don't we start having energy economics textbooks that make sure that we can steer the expectations and we can show that the cost of environmental policy is maybe lower than we expect. That's maybe more the advice, so much to the young people, but more to the senior people. We need textbooks about energy economics and environmental economics that brings the message and shows the fruits of our profession.
Your book. Thanks a lot, Sjak.
Thank you.
It was a pleasure to take you here, having you here. Sjak, he's a professor of economics at Tilburg University, and he was the first keynote here. And yeah, we had the different approach those times. Sorry for that. This year, Robert Metcalf, who is here, only had to give a talk for 1 hour, so, which was great, by the way. So let's continue now with Simone. I also see Mar Rewant. Hello, Mar. Thank you for being there. But let's give the floor to Simone first. And Simone, unfortunately, couldn't come to A Toxa because he never had the opportunity. He's so busy at the moment that he couldn't find a time in this occasion to come. But I think he can give us very valuable insights. He's director of the Florence School for Regulation Climate. Simone, by the way, we have here the first director of the institution, Denny Ellerman, who is in the group. So probably, and the second he is here as well. So basically, we would like to know your words. Also, as president of the European Association of Environmental Resource Economics, Simone is professor, by the way, of the University of Siena, and besides all that. Your time, Simone, and thanks so much for being there.
Well, thank you, Xavier. It's great to see you all. I wish I were there with you, and I really tried hard, as you know, but there was no way to manage with the time. Still, I'm really flattered to be here among the friends of A Toxa, as I feel being part of this group. I'd like to give you my 2 cents on the academic road ahead. And I went back to the email you sent us, Xavier, in which you were giving indications and asking us to focus on topic, method, relation with policymakers, interdisciplinarity, and keeping an eye on the young scholars. So let me try to spend 1 minute on each of these things. Topic. I think environmental economics have grown in terms of topics and as a community over these 20 years. But climate change, in the meantime, has become really very urgent and much more visible to the public opinion. I would say that the fight to climate change is somehow the battlefield now for the success or failure of environmental economics. And it is important not only per se, but also because it is instrumental to raise the attention of policymakers and public opinion, also to climate-related problems. from water scarcity to energy, from ecosystem services to biodiversity. Within climate change, as you know, I have been working very intensively in the last few years on carbon pricing. I've been, I would say, stuck with the emission trading system for many reasons. One is that I think they are one of the main tools, not the only one, but certainly one of the main tools to fight climate change. And two, because they keep changing and they're somehow a sort of moving target. And as such, I think they are particularly interesting for a researcher. They tend to, I would say, challenge also our methodologies. And this brings me to the second point, the methods that you mentioned. As you probably know, I currently direct at EUI a project which is called LifeCOS. COS stands for Collaborative Observatory for the Assessment of the Emission Trading System. And within this project, we tend to compare ex-ante and ex-post results. And what we find with my team is that there is very often a divergence between ex-ante and ex-post results. And this might depend on the fact that, either the ex-ante or the ex-post models are wrong, or both. Certainly, the carbon pricing challenge needs to improve our theoretical models. In some respects, some of our hypotheses are probably wrong or need to be refined. At the same time, some of our empirical studies, despite the improvements that were mentioned before, need to be improved because some of our data needs to be updated. And this leads me to the third point, the relationship with policymakers. Policymakers can and should help us in giving us access, more prompt access to data. At the same time, we should try to improve our capacity to simplify the results, to better convey our results to policymakers. So we still need, after this 20 years, allow me to take this 20 years of A Toxa as a time horizon, we still need to close the gap between policy and science. But on the other hand, let me give an optimistic view. I feel that this gap is progressively reducing. And actually, the dialogue with policymakers is very active on carbon pricing. And I think our studies are actually helping the intergovernmental dialogue on carbon pricing. We not only need an intergovernmental dialogue, but also an interdisciplinary dialogue. And so this brings you to the fourth point that you mentioned in your email. Climate change forces us to improve the dialogue across different disciplines. It forces us to overcome the barriers, to exit from our silos, learn from other disciplines, to make this interdisciplinary dialogue I've always heard of, make it real, because we need really to learn from other disciplines. So this is a challenge for the young generation. They do not simply need to be great environmental economists, they need to be great scientists. They need to understand the others as well. And so this brings me to the last point, because you mentioned the need to keep an eye on young scholars. Well, you know how close young scholars are to my heart, and even as president of the European Association, I really want to facilitate and improve their role also within the association. And then you might ask why you insist on carbon pricing if carbon markets are due to end, are bound to end in the future. One of the most recently quoted papers in the field is the EU ETS endgame, as you probably heard of. So why investing in this topic in particular? Well, for two reasons. One is that climate change, unfortunately, is here to stay. Secondly, is that even if we achieve net zero in, say, by 2050, carbon markets will not end. And this brings me to one point that has been mentioned before, removals. Removals are needed because we have been so slow in reducing emissions. So we need to integrate removals in carbon markets. And we need young scholars' ideas on how to do this in the right way, how to get removals right. Because we need to avoid possible major unintended consequences if we get removals wrong. And the last word is for you, Xavier, for the Atlantic workshop. I'm sorry that this is going to finish, but as you know, the work you have done is really a benchmark that I look at with much interest. And since Denny is also there, I mean, I couldn't be happier to be the third director after Denny and you.
Thanks so much, Simone, for your kind words. And let's go now to Mar, and then I will open the questions.
Xavier, I'm really sorry, but I must go.
Yeah, no worries.
I'm
thank
sorry.
you a lot. Thanks a lot.
Congratulations again. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Bye-bye. So, Mar.
Yeah, thank you, Xavier. I'm so happy to be here and to participate. I'm so sorry I'm only connecting briefly because I'm teaching. So I'm between two sessions. I had this half hour to come. I also want to say hi to Denny. Denny was my mentor at MIT. Not quite my advisor, but a big mentor. Kind of like an advisor, just not formally. And I worked with him in understanding the early impacts of the EU ETS. I came to A Toxa when I was a baby, I think. So because I'm older, but I feel like it was like maybe I was 26, and I had no idea what a conference was and what you were supposed to do at a conference. I think I might have been actually 24, and I thought it was normal that these conferences were so great, and that everyone was so amazingly intelligent and that the topics were so fascinating. So I took this conference as the standard of a conference. Boy, was I wrong. This is not the standard of a conference, it's the standard of the very best conferences in town. But anyway, it was a good benchmark to have. You know, after that, any conference that's not as good as A Toxa, it's not quite a good conference, you know? So it's just amazing what you have done, and I just wanted to congratulate you. And thank you. In terms of topics, the ones that I wanted to highlight is unfortunately the need to more and more think about adaptation. I see it in Spain where temperatures are growing a lot, and yes, we need to keep doing mitigation, but unfortunately, again, not our first best choice. We are in the need of a lot of adaptation. And what I'm increasingly thinking about is that maybe driven by how we think about climate policy, we think of adaptation and mitigation as two separate topics, but there are obvious complementarities between the two. And one example is, for example, with the adoption of solar and batteries, how they are a mitigation strategy, but also a resilience adaptation strategy when it comes to extreme weather events. All these adaptation and the complementarities with mitigation are, in my opinion, an important topic of research for the new folks, and also the old folks for everyone, but also its equity implications are unavoidable. Because what we see is that many of these strategies, if they are only left to private incentives, they will happen always in the same places. So I do think issues, when I think about climate, obviously there is a very big need to do inequity across countries, but I think we also need to do inequity within countries, especially now that the climate impacts are starting to become more severe. And this is what I wanted to emphasize. These inequity aspects are making the transition maybe counterproductively even harder. So it's kind of the inequity makes it even harder to do mitigation, and the lack of mitigation makes it even harder for the adaptation impacts. But I do think we finally are coming to terms with the fact that we need ambitious policies, but ambitious policies that we can actually implement, and that we need to work on making the acceptable set of policies larger and larger so that we can be closer and closer to efficient. But that clearly the best efficient policy might not be in our feasible set. So Xavier actually encouraged us to write a paper with Natalia. It's called The Balancing Act. It's not a formal paper, it's more of a literature review, but trying to highlight how equity, political economy effects, and some of these aspects can be a challenge and affect how feasible our policies are. And if for the ones that are starting, if they want to read that paper, it's a very broad paper, but it provides citations in some of these aspects that are more on the second best of policies that I do think, again, unfortunately, I would rather not be in this situation, but given where we are at, we unfortunately need to think more and more about these second best policies that I was talking about. And that's it. That's what I thought I would highlight. Thank you again so much for being great and setting the standard of amazing conferences.
Thanks a lot, Mar. It is so nice to see you where you are after seeing you 20 years ago. I mean, you set us as a standard, but for us, seeing your accomplishments, and it is also great to have you here when you were starting your work. So let me, I see María Loureiro there. So let me, before I guess, María, you have more time in case, because I don't want to have all these previous participants longer time. So I give the floor, if there is anyone who wants to say anything to some of the people who intervened, to give any comment. Otherwise, we free them, because they did a lot already, and they've been here for more than an hour, some almost 2 hours. So anyone wants to add anything from the table? Or so thanks a lot to all of you, Ottmar, Simone, Sjak, Larry, Karen, Mar. Unfortunately, you have to, or fortunately, you have to come back to the lecture. Thanks so much to all of you for your precious time. And María, I would ask you to wait a bit. I think that we are also waiting for some other people who cannot join us before, and I will give you now the floor to some of our present people here. Okay? Thanks a lot.
Okay. Bye.
Okay, María, we will go with you later. Perhaps we can start with Michael. What do you think, Michael?
So for the first 30 years of my career, I was an environmental economist, and I focused on water, but not energy. I got into climate 20 years ago when California created a climate policy center at Berkeley. And I just want to say, for me, the two people from whom I learned, I think, most were Denny and Dallas in reading their writings and their analysis of emission trading. And so, thank you both. Carlo said this is a critical time. As an American, I feel like a passenger on the Titanic the afternoon before it hit the iceberg. And so for climate policy, for democracy, who knows? But we will overshoot. There's absolutely no doubt. We will overshoot to a significant degree. The fact that we will overshoot changes carbon pricing. The social cost of carbon will become irrelevant. What will price carbon is CDR, the cost of carbon removal. And what we will need is not CCS, but CCCS, carbon certification, capture, and sequestration. So as you know, the policy in the United States, we don't have a carbon market. We do, of course, in California, on the East Coast, we have voluntary carbon markets. My dream for the 5 years from now is that voluntary carbon markets are eliminated and wiped off the earth. And what I think will happen by 2030 or not is we will have to have CDR, and that will price carbon. And when we talk about the price of carbon, it's not $15 or $50 or $100. It's going to be $500 or $600 or $700 because that's the cost of CDR. Now, a second thing is, and this is a mistake we sometimes make, you can't just go overnight from no policy to policy. Ramping things up, and this is a point Dallas made, policy sequencing and ratcheting up is crucial. And if you ratchet up too slowly or in a thoughtless manner, you fail spectacularly. And so I see one of the major research issues for climate economists, environmental economists is, what do we have to do to get to a world 2030, 2034, where the price of carbon is set by CDR? I think we have to phase it in slowly and not go from, a low price to $500 overnight. But that's what CDR is likely to cost. There will be learning by doing. CDR will become cheaper, but at first it will be very expensive. And what I'm saying is, if we are serious about overshoot, if we are serious about the consequences of overshoot, CDR becomes the major policy issue. And as I say, the challenge is, how do we phase things in over a decade, a bit less, a bit more, to get there? And a world of CDR is seriously certifying carbon, certifying capture, certifying temporary sequestration. So sequestration is going to be a heterogeneous commodity. Things are stored for 10 years. Things are stored for 50 years. Things are stored for 200 years and more. And they have to be priced differently. And that has to, there have to be markets around differentiated commodities of sequestration. The other point I want to mention and say is, from reading the literature, and this is my interpretation, so you shouldn't blame anybody whose writings I read, cap and trade has worked primarily because of the cap, not because of the trade. There needs to be a price signal. But quantity limits are, in many cases, crucial to shifting behavior. I've worked on water my whole career. You want less water use? We will need to have quantity limits. The second point I want to make is if one's concerned about distribution and equity, pricing is a lousy tool. What works is some sort of block rate pricing tool. If you use up to so much, you get an allocation and it's a low price.
Yeah.
If you want to use more, if you want more emissions, okay, you can do that, but there's then a much higher price. And how you allocate the quantities, whether it's the quantities of carbon to emit or quantities of water to apply, will vary based on the needs and the circumstances and will reflect equity. And so in water, the whole issue is assigning the rights to water in a manner that is equitable as well as and fair and reasonable. And as we enter a world of overshoot, you know, the issue is not going to be zero fossil fuels in 2034. I mean, I wish it would be. It's going to be who is allowed to extract fossil fuels, and it's going to be the carbon take-back obligation on fuel producers to attach to new fossil fuel emissions the cost of sequestration, the cost of capturing them in the future. So as I say, we are facing a world, and we have to start getting into it, a world where we price carbon based on CDR. Thank you.
Denny, yeah, please go ahead, Denny.
Okay, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here as always, and congratulations to Xavier and all of you for this long run of very successful conferences. I'm very sorry to see them end, but I'm sure somebody will pick up the challenge and find a new occasion for it. What I'd like to talk about in the brief moments I have are the two cap and trade systems that I've had the occasion to work with in my professional life, and to touch on the implications, I think, for global emissions trading that one would derive from them, from that experience. And these are, of course, the US SO2 program and the European Union ETS. Now, turning first to the first of those systems, the US SO2 program, which was created in 1995, my co-author and colleague, Dick Schmalensee, Juan Pablo is also a co-author, when we were writing the book, doing the ex post evaluation of the system, came up with a brilliant metaphor of a star is born. And indeed, at the time, it seemed like the US SO2 system was indeed, it was like a Hollywood star, sort of dazzling beauty of, you know, this final thing that economists had promoted for so long being realized. And Dick's metaphor of the star being born was also more prescient than what he realized at the time. For like the Hollywood star, the beauty fades, less notice is given, and ultimately it died, and is of interest mainly to historians at this point. Now consider the European Union emission trading system. I don't remember anyone at the time or after calling it a star, or even suggesting that it was. And if there was a metaphor that was ever applied to it, I would suggest it was something more in the nature of the ugly duckling. So, but yet, despite the lack of attractiveness, it survives, and I would suggest is even thriving. In 10 years, the US SO2 program was dead. One must keep in mind that, you know, well, I'm sorry, I'll come back to that in a minute. And currently, we have the European emission trading system is nearing 20 years, twice the time of the survival of the US SO2 program, and as I said, striving. So why is there differing fates for these two systems? And I would argue that one of the reasons, we could talk many different things, but I would argue one of the main reasons was the fact that the EU ETS is an international system and the US SO2 system was not. Forget all the talk about states being the laboratory and everything in the United States. As far as the SO2 system, it was imposed at the national level, it was created national, the states had virtually nothing to do with it other than as plants were located in those states. Now, when we look at why did the US SO2 program disappear? Essentially, it's a story of overlapping regulation within the same jurisdiction. Keep in mind that the cap was non-zero. It was an amount which was considered allowable SO2 emissions to avoid acid rain damage. And with the overlapping regulations, of course, we think of fine particulates, mercury, also low gas price and lower gas prices than anyone expected to see, eventually reduced the sources of SO2 emissions to below the cap. And of course, the price fell to zero and people forgot about it and the system died. So now if we look at the EU ETS, we can say there's certainly been plenty of policy overlap in terms of climate objectives with the objective of the cap. But the key difference is that although the aspirations will tend to be for the system as a whole, the implementation of the overlapping policies is mainly at the national level, at the member state level. And those efforts, some quite zealous, others less so. So we have widely varying differences in, let's say, the rigor of implementation of whatever these overlapping policies, but that they have an effect, of course, on the whole system. But that effect is diluted. And the key point is the actions of no single system, no single constituent member state can kill the system. They simply have effects, they get diluted, but the system survives, and it has survived. Now, let's turn to some of the broader, what I would suggest, what I see as some of the broader implications of this comparison. So if you are someone who is starting to despair of COPs and NDCs and all the other acronyms that go with that process, I would suggest that you look at the EU ETS, the ugly duckling, as perhaps the kernel of the future global trading system, such as however it develops, we don't know how, but it's certainly one of the instruments, one of the tools that we believe would help to control those emissions. And to make this point, or to continue this point, I would ask you to think about how this might happen. I mean, how is the whole world going to become a part of the ETS? That's not the point. And let me take Brexit, what seems to be a totally related issue, and let's consider that. Now, Brexit was certainly a major event for the European Union. The papers were filled with stories about it and everything. How much did you hear or read in any of the major papers about the EU ETS? It certainly had an effect. A major economy was exiting the system. One could argue with slight exaggeration, a founding member of the EU ETS, one that in the birth of it had a great deal to do, and yet it exited, and the EU ETS, it was almost, I would even suggest it was a non-event. Now, granted, there was a lot of scurrying that DG Climate had to do to make all the technical adjustments. But if we think on a political level, and if we think of just in terms of the price of carbon and the things that count, it was a non-event. Now, let me come back and then let's think some more about Brexit and what might the future be. And here I would bring to your attention a program that all of you are probably familiar with, which is the Horizon program. So the UK has exited the European Union. The Horizon program ended, but it is started again. And why? Because, well, the EU, let's say, authorities did not require the British to become European, but it was useful to cooperate on the academic level. They're great institutions, great individuals. We liked working with them, and we want to continue to do so, even though they're not a member of the European Union, or as the Brexiters might call, we did not have to be European. Think also of the response to the Ukraine crisis. So we see a developing defense, foreign policy coordination between the European Union and the UK, because there is the UK has some considerable defense capabilities. And it also, from a foreign policy standpoint, whether we're talking from, whether it's economic sanctions or whatever, it's important to coordinate any European response with the UK, with respect to the Ukraine and whatever sanctions and other actions are taken. And so you might ask, well, what about the EU ETS? Could it come back in or be reincorporated into the European emission trading system? I would think so. In fact, I would expect it to be the case, that the UK will find, why do we have to have this system, which is entirely consistent with the existing EU ETS? Why do we now have our own system? We have to make all these will be part of it, so that it would be just as we've seen in the Horizon program, or we see these other cooperative mechanisms which are specialized in certain areas, that they would be allowed to come back in. Now, of course, the European Union would have to say, well, we don't require accession. That's not going to happen for a long time. But you could, we're not going to require you to be a European, but if you want to trade permits, yeah, we're willing to do that. And so if the UK can come back in to the EU ETS, which I would suggest makes a great deal of sense, why not others? And of course, the key distinction to keep in mind here, as I would think of it, is it would happen by accretion, not accession, if you want to indulge in Eurospeak, which is to say you have to become accession, the process by which a candidate country would become a member state, which requires a whole series of integration and so on. But if we're just going to focus on carbon trading or on emissions, that you can it will be an accretion onto the system. And the only requirements then under that circumstance is that you establish or you have a system which is a real cap and trade system, namely it's got a cap. And of course, it's not so much intent and other things, but the focus has really got to be on the monitoring, the verification, the registries, which are the real guts of the system. And of course, there has to be a cap, and then you can start the trading and other things and work very well. And of course, from the standpoint of Europe, the requirement is don't get carried away with, ancillary requirements and other things other than that core element of the cap, the verification, the registries and everything to make the system work. So I think that is one of the challenges, and I think one of the hopes in terms of whether a global or whether it's fully global or significantly global trading system to develop will come about. Thank you.
Thanks, Denny. Lucas.
Thank you very much. I think we are now at the point where everything already has been said, but not everything has been said by everybody. So I try to keep it short. So I'm really honored to be in this crowd of friends of A Toxa. The term friends is a bit stretched in times of social media, but I know with Xavier it really means something. So I'm happy to be here. And well, I could talk about new research topics and new research methods, but maybe I should also mention A Toxa is really the perfect place, is a perfect format, but However, you have to shed tears twice, I believe. The first small tear when you have to travel here, and the second, the big one when you have to go again after 3 days, which will be tomorrow, and will be a very sad event when you have to. So it's always so fast that it's over. So my topic was, and I'm still elaborating a bit, why the results or the prescriptions and our recipes of economists are not so well received in policy area sometimes. And I was asking myself, what could we do better? Where should we improve? I believe there's room for improvement, even in our core. So if we talk about social cost of carbon, or if we talk about the optimal price path, I believe our models, they still have room for improvement. We still could do better. When I look at what currently is done in terms of climate damage functions, it's a really important topic, but it's a difficult one. We have more work to do there. When you look about abatement costs, is a bit relates what Sjak had before about the technical progress. How much can we predict it? How reliable is it to integrate? Because it's crucial what we believe, what will be the development of our renewable energies. So there we should really, first of all, improve our core business, and then, of course, then also try to communicate as good as we can. Secondly, instead of talking in terms of prices, probably could also, why not talk sometimes in terms of quantities and policy outcomes? Not only say, look, this is the optimal carbon price, but say, look, this is the consequence for your consumption path, this will be the emissions, this will be whatever concern, what other variables are important. So I think this is more illustrative, and this is where natural sciences and all these IPCC reports are much more kind of, they're more iconic, that people can gather these pictures, whether our reports are a bit somehow, a bit clean and a bit maybe a bit dry in the end sometimes. And then, well, there are concerns, and we heard it, equity concerns, labor market concerns, all kind of other regional concerns. We have to take this seriously, of course. We have to integrate it. And political feasibility for me is not just something that we do at the end and say, oh, maybe we have to integrate it from the beginning and say this is a hard constraint, and we cannot simply prescribe any carbon price development which we know from the beginning that it will not be implemented. Otherwise, maybe we can convince our government, maybe we convince the parliament, but then you still have the street protesters, and you still have referenda. In Switzerland, we have a negative referendum. In France, we had the street protesters, and what was the result? This very nice design of a carbon price was removed immediately, and then we have nothing. Instead of being more cautious, integrating this from the beginning, and then probably have an outcome which is more favorable. And lastly, I think we could also address bigger concerns, because economists, they run into quite serious, the people are concerned that we do not get it right. I don't know if you ever have experienced this. We are here in our bubble, and we know exactly what the others mean, but when we talk to natural scientists, the engineer, there are basic concerns about economic discipline. They believe that we have basic, things that we don't get right, and then they come up with degrowth and all this kind of strange proposals, and we also have to talk about this, why it is a bad idea to have degrowth, why it's a bad idea to have a price freezing or something like this. So we have to take this up and to be in this discussion and debate, and there's lots to do there as well. And finally, I think, well, in terms of methodology, I mean, this is not the most fancy end now of but I have my jokes already done, so I'm out of jokes. So I wanted to make a stand for theory, because I think we have always thought about the balance between theory, empirics, and CG modeling. All of them are very important for our field, obviously. But in recent times, we have a bit more now a focus on empirical work, which is great. But I think when people say, well, you have a great paper, but that's only theory, then we have to be a bit careful, and maybe we should qualify this and say, look, if you do empirics, if your model is based on a firm theoretical foundation, actually, I think empirical work is much more valued. So this is an important value added if you have empirical research, that you have a firm, a solid theoretical foundation. Secondly, if you do some empirical design where you have some, for example, for identification purposes, you need some structure. For example, you have to work on shocks instead of long-run development. And then this identification strategy leads to find out something which is probably not exactly what in theory would like to find out. So this impulse response functions, which are now fashionable, one has to be careful what they actually tell us and what they do not tell us. And for that also the theory is very important to get it. And for the very end, I would say that maybe this is the most difficult message, and I don't know if I can still get this across at this late hour. When you do empirical research, of course, you see all the imperfections of the current world, and that is fine. And you see what does not work and how imperfect policies are, imperfect people act, and how badly they are informed. But in fact, we should also sometimes take the liberty to think about an alternative, about a better world, about a completely different world, maybe. And for this, when you have a good theory, I think theory is very helpful.
Thanks a lot, Lucas. And now JP.
All right, I think this is a wonderful way to close this 10th edition. And after 20 years, it's sad that it's, but I don't want to, keep you here for too long. So let me just, I think there were some good ideas. I mean, for young researchers here, mentioned about market design. I think Michael mentioned a few. How you think about this sequestration, permits with different, vintages and the different, time horizons. So I think there's also Karen Palmer mentioned a few too, So there's a lot of issues about market design, how you can do that, and these are always very difficult questions and not easy. So there's plenty of room there. And also, let me finish with something that Larry Goulder said. I think it's very important. Is this idea of looking for policies that are politically feasible, but at the same time, they deliver some important welfare gains without, neglecting, distributional implications. I think there's a lot of that going on as well. I mean, in terms of potential research, and of course, there are going to be second best policies. I mean, rarely we see first best policies, and I think a good example is the work done by Marve Wand over the years. It's exactly about that, looking at different policies, how you can improve them. And I think it's this is a way I think we have to contribute as researchers, showing, ways to improve gradually things, not, radical innovations, but more like gradual, improvements. So I think there's, for the young researchers, I think there's still a lot of work to be done. So I think the future looks good.
Now let's go to María. Thank you, María. María unfortunately had to come back to Santiago yesterday night for business, for work, not for business, sorry, for work this morning. And it's a pleasure to have you here. You were scheduled to be in person, but still you had time to connect you from Santiago after your busy agenda. So thanks a lot, María, and the floor is yours.
Yeah, nothing to thank me about. On the opposite, I want to thank you for giving me the chance to be here with you in this closing meeting and with friends of A Toxa. And first of all, I want to do that, to thank you, to thank Xavier, and to thank all of the co-organizers of A Toxa, because this has been 20 fantastic years in which I particularly learned a lot, and I got the chance to interact with many of you and get a great set of ideas that helped me a lot. So I am honored and grateful to Xavier and to many others who have contributed over the years to A Toxa. I think A Toxa has become like a very fascinating place and a very inspirational place, and I think that's very important to go to a place in which you get some inspiration and some great ideas to move forward. And I think this has been way accomplished. So congratulations, and also congratulations because over the years you guys have been extremely successful producing special issues, papers, and so on and so forth. And many of us, as when we were young scholars, we had the chance to join in and learn from you. So I'm extremely grateful for the opportunity I had over the years. And I hope that this opportunity that closes today, this A Toxa, as we understand it now, may continue in the future, serving young scholars, maybe in other directions. But I really hope we find a way of continuing in different manners, maybe in different with different ideas, but still moving forward, because this is what has been done by A Toxa in the past years. I think the spirit, the idea of moving forward has been always there. So to talk about ideas that we should consider in the future is a bit difficult because I'm the last one now. But after hearing Michael Hanemann, I want to tell him that I am doing my research career on the opposite. I start looking at climate change and so on and so forth, but now I look at water. So I am going on the back, I'm driving on the opposite direction. And why? Because I think that we have to be more concerned about the whole spectrum, not only energy, but we should look into more details about some aspects that Margant was pointing out. Resilience, how to improve it, how to increase resilience, how to make our societies more resilient toward extreme events, toward droughts, toward wildfires, and so on. Living in a Mediterranean country like Spain, in which about 80% of the people living here has deficit of water, makes you think about a complex future in the next few years. So I think we should also keep in mind the interaction that climate change is having in other sectors, not only energy, of course, and we are doing that, but looking at it with different lenses so that we are able to push forward adaptation, very, very, very urgent adaptation strategies. And also another aspect in doing that, I believe that we have been very successful over the years designing markets and providing a lot of theoretical ideas which are really great. But we have not been so successful, or not always at least, to change that behavior. And I think that's a pending homework for us, to figure out how we can change human behavior, how we can push adaptation strategies faster, and particularly, of course, mitigation ones. There, I believe we still need to learn a lot about international differences and look at different venues of data collection that may help us to understand a more global environment, a more global world in which all of us operate. So these are just a few ideas, but as you see, I'm very concerned about the future of particularly Mediterranean countries, and that's food for thought. And thank you so much for the chance, and I hope now you have a great afternoon with the things that follow through in the conference.
Thanks a lot, María. And I think now it's time for the best friends of A Toxa, Andreas and Massimo, for them to close this session with the words you want. Of course, we can also give the floor to the public, and if we finish 10 minutes before schedule, it's much better than if we finish 5 minutes later.
I will be short, but I think I want to add some topics for future research. I notice, we need an energy transition, and to perform this energy transition, we need investment. This means that we need rational investors, rational consumers, rational firms. Now, what I notice is that we should be able to integrate in our modeling exercise, in our policy evaluation, more insight from behavioral economics. I think this is a very important point, because otherwise we risk to make suggestions also of market-oriented instruments that they are not working in a very effective way. Last year we published a paper in Journal of Public Economics where we clearly show that people that are not informed, they are not using subsidies, and therefore the effectiveness of a subsidy to promote the adoption of electric cars is very low. The second point that I want to add to this discussion is that in the industrialized country live more or less 20% of the people around the world. If we don't care too much or enough of what's going on in the 80% in the rest of the world, and we are not trying to find very interesting solution and constructive solution to change the energy system there, then we will not solve any problem. Now, the third element that I want to bring to this discussion is related to Sjak. Sjak made a very interesting point from my point of view, is teaching, or is text. You mentioned textbooks in energy economics and policy. Now, if you look at the curriculum of the study in economics around the world, you will find that we have few courses in energy economics and policy. And this, I think, we should start from there to promote more these courses, because in environmental economics, we are dealing with this topic, but just marginally. And related to this, we have the issue with the textbooks, and now I am advertising a book, because we are just publishing, well, in July, with Cambridge University Press, a book that is, the title is Introduction to Energy Economics and Policy. And I think we should go further, and I come back to the point raised by Lucas. I think we should also teach energy economics and policy to policymakers, because if we don't speak the same languages, then it will be very difficult to make sure that they will understand exactly in which direction we suggest to go. This was my.
Well, I'm seeing, thank you, Massimo, very, very, very good reflection. I'm seeing Dick Schmalensee. Thank you very much for being there. Let's see if it works. And I would give you the floor now. Dick is a professor at the MIT, as you all know, a big contributor to energy economics and to other fields in economics. And we were honored to have him as a keynote speaker years ago in A Toxa. So, Dick, thanks a lot, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I want to begin by thanking the organizers and all of those who've made this remarkable conference go for 20 years, 10 occasions and 20 years. I'm sorry that it's ending, because this field is certainly not through. I look back at 2014, which is when I gave a keynote. The theme of the conference was energy conservation. One does not hear much about energy conservation these days. My talk had to do with results that were emerging in the MIT Energy Initiative study on solar energy, the future of solar energy. And I said, well, you know, solar power has to become a lot cheaper for it to play a major role. And it did. And here we are. And now, of course, we're worrying about decarbonizing the world and electrifying everything. And that has posed a whole new set of problems. My recent work, I've focused on implications of the fact that with a lot of zero marginal cost generation, marginal cost, system marginal cost, will be much more variable going forward than it is now. With electric vehicles and heat pumps, there will be much more shiftable load that can be shifted easily over hours. Shifting that load to the right places, to the right times, can yield large efficiency benefits. And our simulations, there are large chunks of time with effectively a zero price. That's when you'd like to charge the vehicles. That's when you'd like to do all kinds of other things. But there are two problems. First, people, as was just mentioned, people are not computers. They do not respond automatically and efficiently and effectively to price changes, particularly changes that are frequent. Spot pricing is not popular. It involves bill risk, and people don't necessarily respond. And if they do respond, you have a problem of power, not of energy. You have a problem of overloading distribution circuits if everybody decides to charge their electric vehicles when suddenly price becomes cheaper. So I think there are a whole set of new problems going forward. I'm particularly interested and concerned at the retail level. I do think, as was mentioned a few minutes ago, we need to think more in terms of behavioral economics. We need, perhaps, I hate to say this, but to talk to psychologists and others who study human behavior in ways we don't. Because I think the future power systems, again, they're going to be very different. It's important to get them right. It's important to not have them so overwhelmingly risky and expensive that they break the bank and there is enormous consumer resistance. I think that's a serious problem. I think there's a lot more work to be done on energy and environmental economics and policy. As I said, I applaud the organizers for carrying on this conference and the work that it has facilitated for all these many years as the landscape has changed and continues to change. So thank you for letting me talk and giving me a few minutes to express my appreciation and, such as they are, my thoughts about the future.
Thanks a lot, Dick. It was a pleasure to have you here, as I said before, and well, we'll continue working. This is not the end of our work, of course, and we are also thinking of new avenues of collaboration with the co-organizers. Okay, Andreas. Okay. Time for you, and we close.
Very quick. So well, thanks for all these, I think, important insights. I just want to make 3 comments. Actually, the first one on the distributional aspect, I think that's really important. I mean, we really have to understand better how these policies work in terms of vertical and horizontal distribution. On the other hand, of course, we always have to be careful not to overdo it, no? Because in the end, of course, we are confronted with a transformation where there will be winners and there will be losers, no? And we believe that if we do that efficiently, no, there is also some room, no, for taking care of that. And I mean, we've seen a lot of deadlock of policies in Germany, for example, where we started, no, to only look at who's losing and actually trying to make everybody better off, and that's not possible by definition, no, almost, if you have unilateral type of policies that are long-term. So you're not going to make everybody better off today in the north. So this is something we should keep in mind. The other thing I would like to comment is on feasibility. I think that's really important. I mean, when we talk about policies, we should think about feasibility, but there I would also claim that feasibility is not exogenous, no? I mean, in the way it's endogenous, and we have heard about it in terms of, you know, all the behavioral insights that we are having. You referred to education or literacy issues. No, we have to educate policymakers. I mean, we can work also, no, on making these things feasible, no, even though they seem crazy, no, like Denny, no, the ETS, no, a crazy idea these Americans brought on us, no, 30 years ago, and it worked out, no. So because we kind of educated or argued, no, for this instrument. So therefore, I would also claim, no, that we have to work a bit on feasibility, and last, we should be a bit broader, no, and that was what Robert showed us today in terms of this welfare analysis, because I think there we have really something to offer also, no, to the broader public, let's say, in thinking about how we can analyze these problems in a broader welfare economic perspective, and I would think there we are also at the very beginning, and I think these 3 points would be something where I would really love to see the profession moving into, and I'm hoping that we are all continuing these type of discussions. Thanks.
I'm sitting there, Rob, and I don't want to put you in a compromise, but your keynote was excellent this morning, and perhaps some other part of your work is on experimental, on field experiments, and we have some people from companies, a couple of people from companies here, but also we were talking a lot about, you know, policies at the government level. Of course, this is a very powerful tool, both for companies, for governments. So perhaps you want to close this session giving some, you know, 1 minute there, not more on your view. No, more than the 1 minute can be possible, but you know, I don't want to put you without previous notice in a big commitment. Just what you see for young researchers in that area, given that we have you here and you are a key person in this area.
You don't want to hear my voice. It's bad. Yeah. So over the last 2 years, I've joined the Octopus Energy Group in the UK, which is the largest energy retailer in the UK today. And they created a research center called the Center for Net Zero. And the sort of aim and objectives of the center is to think about how to generate evidence, to think about what's the just, the fair, and the efficient transition to net zero for the energy grid. And that has come from support from the VCs, from the CEO, from the executive board, because they do believe that there are so many questions out there that we don't know the answers to, and only through developing research will we do that. So over the last 2 years, I've been trying to partner with various elements of the group to create experiments to generate evidence. So we have, I think I can say this publicly, we have a lot of experiments going on in thinking about how to randomize heat pumps, how to randomize solar, how to randomize batteries across households, randomizing different levels of subsidies for those technologies, but also seeing the interactions. So for example, all these long-term 2050 models have an assumption about what is the consumption of households when they have a battery, an EV, a heat pump, a smart thermostat, and all of the bells and whistles that we think consumers will have. And we have no idea how they're going to consume. Come back to Dick's point, we have no idea how they'll shift their consumption during the day, how important prices are. And so there's a real value for companies, especially utilities in this space, to do field experiments with academics. I've just spent the last 10 years of my career trying to convince companies to do experiments. Now I'm sort of more on the inside where I've got a willing partner that's willing, to some extent, to allow me to randomize the parameters that are important for thinking about welfare for the policies that we have in thinking about that fair and efficient transition to net zero. So I do think that that will become more and more of interest to utilities. So to all the junior researchers in the room, like I spent a lot of time trying to convince utilities to run experiments in the US with investor-owned utilities. It's very difficult. They run a monopoly. They're not always that interested. Depends on what the regulator wants them to do. But I think as competition comes into the market and more retailers are interested in keeping their consumers and thinking about the environmental consequences of their consumers, I think there'll be more and more interest in running experiments and doing research. Not necessarily all experiments. We've got some natural experiments happening because things are not always given to customers at the same time for everyone. So there's a lot of potential to use some natural experimentation in organizations. But I do think there'll be a lot coming down the pipeline of utilities and private sector organizations that want to know how to do better for their consumers and for society. And I think that's what I've been trying to do for my career, is find that win-win-win. The win for the company, the win for their customers, but also a win for academic research and how we can actually push forward the agenda of a fair and efficient transition.
Great, Rob, thanks a lot. And I think with that, we close this very interesting session. And I would like to thank you all here. And those of you who are still there, Dick, Simone, María, thanks a lot. And a big applause for them and for you.